The 1% rule is broken, and here's what's working now.
Yeah, a lot of people back in the day, you were looking for a 1% deal, right? The 1% rule. So basically, if you bought, a home for $300,000, you'd want to rent it for $3,000.
Yeah.
That is not happening anymore. And if you're looking for that, then it's going to be really hard to find.
Yeah. So in your mind, what do you think people should look for now with not the 1% rule?
You need to look for some kind of cash flow.
Yep.
Even, when you say break even, I think break even is risky because there's always going to be expenses you're not thinking of or that pop up, whether that's vacancy, whether that's CapEx. Like if you're calculating all that, like vacancy, CapEx, everything into your rental calculation, then break even's probably fine. But most people just look at rent expenses and maybe they put a little away each month for things breaking,
Yeah.
And if you're doing that, you need to add in a couple $100 because there's going to be more things that pop up. But I do think, though, that if you're breaking even, then right now that's still a win in my opinion. And I'm investing in things that I'm breaking even on.
Yeah, especially if you can see a path forward to, okay, when this tenant leaves, there's room for rent increase. Like if you know that, even if you underwrite conservatively, if you know that you can increase rent or make a couple of modifications to be able to justify that increase. If it breaks even, it doesn't make it necessarily a bad deal.
And you bring up a good point because you're, being conservative on your rental estimates. So, clients ask me all the time, what can this rent for? And you never know an exact number, but I'll look at the area. And if it's, I'm seeing 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, I'm not assuming 2.4 and I'm sure not assuming 2.5. I'm usually looking at kind of days on market where it fits in. So I'm going to be conservative and say probably 2.2. But then if it rents for 2.3 or 2.4, then that's a couple extra $100 every month in my pocket. But sometimes I work with people and they're like, I think this will rent for 2.5. It's nicer than all these homes. And I'm like, okay, but none of these homes are renting. So you don't know that the 2.4 is going to rent for 2.4 as it sits there, and there are rental caps. So you kind of need to look at, unfortunately, there's not, you can go on Zillow and look at sold homes, and you can go on the MLS and look at sold homes. Unfortunately, it's harder to do that with rented homes. So there's nothing that you can really say, oh, this house rented for, $2,400, this house rented for $2,200. You basically have to kind of follow, and then when a listing comes down, you can kind of assume that that's what it rented for. So there's not like a direct science, and it really also depends on what's available. Like if there's a bunch available all of a sudden and a bunch gets rented, then maybe 2 months later when you rent yours because there's less available in that specific area, because usually tenants are pretty glued to a specific area, then maybe you get a better tenant. Maybe you get more money.
Well, yeah, and in our area, there's sometimes utilities are included, sometimes they're not. So even if you're looking at just the rental rate, you have to break it down a little bit more to know, is garbage included, internet, all of these things, because if you're just looking at the rate itself, if something rents for 2.5 and that includes everything and yours doesn't, then you're not going to get 2.5. So doing those rental analysis is super important when you break it down.
Yeah, and you have to be careful too about what you're paying for, So that's what scares me about big HOA numbers, because that comes straight off the top. You can't charge your tenant for the HOA. So,
no.
If your HOA is $400 a month, and that's why I got rid of a lot of my condos for rentals, is because that's coming straight off the top. That's why I don't really advise tenants to buy with solar panels, because you can't tell your tenant, hey, I'm going to save on your electric bill. It's just $300 a month that you're going to pay me to then save $500 a month on your electric bill. That's not a thing. So these things as a landlord, you have to absorb. And it doesn't mean I'm against all HOAs or even all solar panels. I've seen solar leases that are $50 a month. I think that could be a great incentive for your client. But most of the time, most HOAs and most solar panels are going to just destroy your cash flow.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to our next point of buying better and cheaper is not always better. So from an investor standpoint, a lot of times I'll get calls where it's like, hey, this one meets the 1% rule, or it could. And I said, well, that's a cheap house. It's not in a great location. The condition doesn't match the price that they're asking. So it's not always trying to back into a purchase price number. You have to look at the quality of the property and the other factors that go along with it.
I know, and I think new investors do this a lot, right? Because you're like, I'm really scared, in our market, a starter home, let's call it $400, $450. It's a lot of money. So they're like, I'm really afraid to buy something that expensive. So I'd rather try to buy something that's $200,000 here, $250,000 here, and now you're in the outskirts, and now you're in an age-restricted community, and now you're in a really expensive HOA condo, but all of a sudden you're not getting the tenants or the rent that you need. So it's like, I know you're scared to make that additional jump, but if you can get more rent, sometimes that does make sense. And if you can't rent the property because it's in an area that nobody wants to live, then that's going to be a problem for you. Because, you look at certain areas and it's like, there's a bazillion rental listings in this little area. Mm-hmm. And so you have to know that if they're sitting at 1.4, you might have to come in at 1.2 to get it rented. And then if all those start dropping their prices, then you have to start dropping your price. So that's what happens when you have an area where there's not a lot of demand, but a lot of times the prices are cheaper. So people say, oh, that's where I want to invest in, Neil, because the prices are cheaper. But then if you can't rent it out, it doesn't really matter how cheap the prices are,
Yeah.
Where like if you can rent somewhere where people want to live, even if you're spending more, it can make sense based on your rental numbers.
Yeah, and that's why, it sounds repetitive, but real estate's all about location, location, location. So thinking about that.
I do want to bring something up, though, because I know people out there are saying, okay, because you and I were talking about this at lunch because Tara's in town, which is fun.
Yeah.
But you can see her little sunburn. So, they say, okay, so when you had the 1% rule, that was a really good return, right?
Yep.
Like you could get, $3,000 a month on a $300,000 house. Now, maybe that you're not getting that. I don't know what your numbers are, but depending on how much you put down, maybe the house is now $450,000 and, maybe you're only making $1,200 a month, like $1,800, probably more realistically, like $1,800, $2,000 a month. So it's like a 0.5% rule. But we were talking at lunch and it's like, where are you going to invest your money though?
Yep.
Because this is the giant question. I mean, everyone can say, well, that's a horrible investment. Well, where are you putting your money? Because you can keep putting it in the stock market, but we all know the stock market's eventually going to crash. It can't just keep going up forever. Yeah. And, you and I were talking about what if there's massive unemployment, because that's a thing that could happen in the next 5 years. Well, the stock market's not going to keep going up because a lot of the businesses aren't going to keep doing well. So you have to really think about where you're going to put your money. Are you going to hold on to it? Because we're probably going to have massive inflation. Yeah. So at least with real estate, people always need a place to live, and it's a hard asset, so it moves with inflation. So at least you have that. And so you can say, you can be critical, but there's really no great place to put your money right now. So instead of holding on to it, I'm choosing to put it in real estate because I'm afraid to hold on to it. Because if they lower rates, real estate could start going up again, and inflation is just going to kill my purchasing power. So to me, I would rather be in an asset, and I bought a home in 2023 and everyone said, oh my gosh, your home, it's down probably 20 grand, 30 grand from where you started. I bought it for $6. It's probably worth like $570. Okay. But I've collected $100,000 in rent over like almost $130,000 in rent over the last 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So like, what are you waiting for? You know what I mean? Like I'm paying that down over time, and I could wait, but it really wouldn't have got me anywhere.
And you've taken depreciation on that home. So what has that offset your taxes?
Yep.
Or taken expenses that you could put against the property. So what's all of that worth? So if you only look at one metric, then sure, it's easy to kind of question or get that uncertainty to creep in. But if you look at real estate from a holistic approach, that's where it comes in at. And the other thing that we were just visiting about at lunch is, I live in a market, very Midwest, very rural, where we can meet the 1% rule almost all day long. And that's not the case in other parts of the country. But then kind of fast forwarding to location on what areas are going to potentially appreciate faster, or where's going to be the growth? Where do people want to live? And what does that mean as the gap between, earnings go up, or where are the renters going to be? So even though I can hit 1% deals all day long, like hit a single after a single after a single, like I want to look at something that's maybe a little bit longer term. And so we just had a great conversation about that. And I think that's something that's common that investors often talk about is, okay, is this really this cash flows, but is this really where I want to park my money?
But you have to look at the long term too. So I was listening to a podcast this morning, and the guy was in California. And in California, you can always see what somebody paid for their house, and that's where they pay their taxes, right? So it's like a 1% of their purchase price, which is crazy. So, but he was saying, his neighbors are in their late 80s, and they bought their house for $45,000. He bought his house in 2022 for $4 million. So when you look at that, and that's California, of course, but things are going to appreciate over time, so you can say, if that was a rental property, you could say, oh, these people are crazy. They're only making like a 0.5% return. It's not worth it. But what's it going to be in the long run? Because I do think we're going to have a run on hard assets, because that's what you have when you have inflation, because a house becomes more expensive to build. So obviously it becomes more expensive to sell, or they stop building them. I mean, that really is how it works. And so you just have to kind of look at these things when you're deciding where to invest. It's not easy to decide where to invest right now.
Yeah, no, it's not. And we're both have investments, and we both are constantly looking at different deals, and neither of us have a magic answer, but I think it's where you want to be, where you might want to spend your time when you get older and retire. Like, is it good to think about that in the long term, where let's say you want to retire in Florida or Arizona? Is it good to be looking at a place now so then you can build equity and then eventually have that place to go? That's could be potential.
Absolutely. Everyone has different reasons for investing, and it's not always just about money, but we always want to be making money. You never want to be like shelling out money. But, I have clients right now looking for an Airbnb because, they're in Oregon and they want to eventually move down here. So they are going to Airbnb it, visit it when they want for a while, but then when they go to retire, this could be a nice place for them to retire to. So, there's different reasons everyone has, but, I know people in the comments are going to get critical, but the truth is there's not a great place to invest right now, and I don't think sitting on your money is great advice either.
No, and I think if you're waiting for a unicorn, like a super home run deal, that's not always great either. Like, because if you wait too long and you risk sitting on the sideline, then what are you missing out on? So it's kind of weighing that a little bit.
Well, and plus people never think that they have a unicorn. There's certain people that do. Like, I work with some investors and they see it. Like, I'm like, listen, this is an awesome deal, and they jump on it.
Yep.
But a lot of investors, especially new investors, you send them a great deal and they just think, yeah, but what if the market crashes? Yeah, but what if unemployment goes up? Yeah, but I bet there's a better one. And then somebody else takes it. And then, you kind of move on. But there really are good deals right now to be had or created. But, you can't just not make any action because you think the market's so bad, or that you think it's such a bad investment because, in your bank account, it's not making any money either, because it's getting eaten away with inflation.
Yep. Which is something to keep in mind. And I think one thing that's often overlooked is creative financing. And sometimes when you say, oh, I want to do creative financing, like all the red flags pop up, like, what are you trying to pull? But there's just the reality is I've purchased a home on creative financing. A lot of people have. It's not for everyone, but there are a lot of great ways to structure. So it's like a win-win for the buyer and the seller. And in turbulent markets or even just in stagnant markets, it's a good thing to look at.
Yeah, creative financing can be awesome, because, and I actually, you need to dig into creative financing deals. Like, assumable mortgages are great, seller carrybacks are great, but like an assumable mortgage came to me yesterday from a client, and he's like, yeah, like, I'm considering doing this. It's 3.5%. I'm like, this would be great. He goes, yeah, but they're asking for $40,000 more than the loan. And I said, well, for one, they're going to expect some kind of down payment. But for two, you don't have to offer that. Like, you can offer lower. And so, don't push these things to the side, because a deal at 3.5%, I would do all day long, because you're literally beating inflation.
Yep.
Because our true inflation is not 3.5%.
No, especially if they change the way they measure it.
Well, right. Exactly. So our true inflation, everyone that's been to the grocery store and everywhere else knows 3.5% is not our true inflation number. So, and even if you want to argue that it's meeting inflation, like, you're still meeting inflation on your loan. So, it really can make sense to do this. And then you do have this asset that's at 3.5%.
Well, and so when I bought my property, and I just use this because it's a great example, I went to the seller and I said, Mr. Seller, I can get bank financing and give you this. Or I can do a contract for deed and I would give you this amount interest. This is how it would work for your taxes. Talk to your CPA or your tax advisor, but I think there's other advantages for you. And it worked out better for him to sell it contract for deed. We did it 5 years. At that time, we did it at 6%, which was a little bit less than a bank, but then he was excited to continue getting that mailbox money because he was used to getting rent checks every month off of this triplex. So for him, it was a win-win. And for me, I put a little bit less down than what I would have with a bank, but it was just the easy button. I didn't have to deal with an appraisal. I didn't have to go through all of these things when I was confident of the value, so I didn't have any questions in that regard. But now here we are, almost 4 years into a 5-year contract for deed, and I just visited with him the other day, and I said, hey, his name's Ken. I said, hey, Ken, are you going to extend, or what are we going to do here? And he goes, yeah, give me a call in a couple months, and we'll work something out. I'm like, great, because if he's doing something at 5 or 6%, that's less than what the bank is right now on commercial, and it works for him and it works for me. So just having that conversation and relationships go a long way.
Yeah, creative financing, a lot of realtors shrug that off, and I really do embrace it. You have to be careful, to make sure it's the right creative financing offer.
Yeah.
And you have to check with the people that are, you're doing the creative financing with, but it can be really good, especially for sellers right now that they're trying to sell their property for a certain price and interest rates has made that difficult and they don't want to lower. That can be a win-win situation.
Yeah.
So the other thing is forced appreciation. So we were talking about this at lunch as well. And I think a lot of investors are missing the mark on this. Multifamily's done forced appreciation forever. They've rehabbed, done the BRRR method. They're doing all the things to try to force that appreciation. So basically, you're doing something that's giving you more money on the property that you're doing. So you're not just waiting for time to take over. You're actually doing something. But on the single family market, a lot of these markets now are coming up with things that you can do as well. Of course, you can flip the home and get some more money out of it. But there's other things. Like if you have a lot of land in Phoenix, they passed something now where you can actually build up to 3 units on your land. So you can basically take something zoned single family and put 2 additional units on it in the back, and some of these lots are big enough. That's forced appreciation. When you rent all 3 of those, you're forcing appreciation and you're not having to put in as much money as it would be to then buy 3 properties. So I do think that is the new play, especially in these bigger cities, because housing prices are so high. In order to make the money and make the investment make sense, you might have to do some kind of forced appreciation.
Yeah, and one thing that I've done to achieve forced appreciation in my rural Midwest market is I'm always thinking, who is going to rent this unit? And I like to buy smaller homes, things that are everything on the main level. So some homes have basements, but some of them are on the main level. So I'll bring laundry up to the main, and then I can attract an older retiring farmer that's moving into town from the farm. It just makes their lives so much easier. I have several widowed, which is sad, but they're single older ladies that are in their 70s, 80s. I even have one that I think is 90, and everything's on the main floor. And so if I replace a tub, I might replace it with a walk-in shower, like a step-in shower, because I know who I'm trying to rent from or rent to, and it just makes it a lot easier because then you know who you're renting to and what you can do to force appreciation, because older people that are moving in off the farm, they have money, but they don't want to spend money on an assisted living or something when they're not quite ready for that. So they're ready to justify having something nice, but not having to pay $3 or $4 grand a month on assisted living or nursing home type stuff. So that's kind of my sweet spot, and it's been great.
I love renting to an elderly person. I do. That's why I won't buy any units with stairs, because in Phoenix, we don't have a ton of stairs anyways. But I don't want to, if I had a condo, I wouldn't want to be on the second floor. If I had a rental, I'd want it to be one floor because, elderly people are great tenants and they stay a long time. They're not moving around all the time. There's not a lot of life circumstances other than maybe assisted living that are going to make them want to move. So they can be really, really good tenants. And to your point, you have to think about who your demographic is when you're putting together your rental for the forced appreciation. Because if you're in a really young city and you decide to make it great for an elderly person, you're obviously not going to see. There's some thought, it takes some experience. You might want to actually rent your place first, see who's interested in it, and then start tailoring that to them.
Yeah. Another thing is like garages, and in Minnesota, we have harsh winters, and you guys have harsh summers, so you like carports and garages and things, but somebody's not going to want to scoop out their car. If somebody's, going to work or, older person that can't physically do that, attached garages are very important. So that's almost a deal breaker for me. I maybe have one property that doesn't have an attached garage, and that's at the top of the list. Even if it's a crappy old attached garage, at least it's there and you have something to work with.
Yeah, garage is a deal breaker for me too. Well, I would consider a carport in Phoenix because we don't have a lot of weather. I'd consider it, but I really would like a garage. All my properties have garages. Mm-hmm. I do think for a lot of people, like if you don't have a garage or a carport, you're going to have a hard time renting it. Yeah. You're not going to get top dollar because who wants their car baking in 115 degrees? Yeah. Not a lot of people.
Or scrape off 3 inches of ice.
Yep.
Like, I don't know what's worse.
Right? Exactly. We both have harsh weather, just opposite. But you really just have to understand your market. That's the biggest thing. You have to understand your market, and you have to understand where people want to live, who the tenants in that area are going to be. Yep. And that's why if you're going to be investing out of state, you have to make sure that you're investing with somebody that understands the area and that you're working with a realtor that understands the area. Because, you can get taken down the wrong path if you don't know the area. I mean,
and I think that's what differentiates novice or average investors from great investors is they really know the area like the back of their hand. If they look at a property at the corner of X, Y, and Z, they know exactly where that's at. They know exactly, the neighborhood itself. And you really have to dial it in because if you cast a wide net, then you can catch a lot of bad fish.
Yeah. Well, if you don't know the area, you can be so easily talked into so many things. Like I was on the phone with my Airbnb client yesterday, and we had on an Airbnb specialist because she's kind of helping walk them through what to look for with an Airbnb, which was great. And she starts telling them how great certain parts of Arizona are for an Airbnb. And in my mind, I'm like, there's so much crime in that area. That's an awful place for an Airbnb, but it's cheaper, but it's awful. But if they didn't have somebody like me that knew the area, they could easily be talked in, and all of a sudden they have an Airbnb in a place with bad crime, and people leaving reviews about how bad the crime is, and then you're obviously not going to book anyone. So these errors can be really big errors, and sometimes just driving down doesn't always help because you don't really understand like where the locals hang out. So you might be in this great area, but maybe it's super far from where a lot of people are, where people want to live, and you don't know the area. So you're like, well, this place is nice, but you don't understand how far out you are or what area you're in. So you really need to work with someone if you don't know the area that really knows it, that's going to be honest with you about it. Not someone that's going to sugarcoat it, try to convince you to buy something in a bad area because they make more commission or because it's in your price point and they know you're not going to buy anything if you don't buy something out there. Like you want to work with someone that's going to tell you straight, like, listen, if your budget is $350,000 in Phoenix and you want to be in an area where you're going to attract a lot of tenants in a house, there's not really anywhere right now that I would tell you to invest. Like save up some more money, increase your budget to 4, and then we can probably talk. So, you need someone to be honest.
Well, and then if you're looking at an Airbnb, in my mind, if I'm a consumer looking to book an Airbnb, I'm looking at proximity to the things that I want to do when I'm on vacation. Where are we going to go? And that doesn't always translate into, icky neighborhood or, XYZ. So you have to really put yourself in the shoes of whoever is going to be renting that property, whether it's a long-term tenant or Airbnb client. What does that look like? And those things are so important when it comes to actually pulling the trigger on a purchase.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you're looking to buy something, check us out. I'm in Arizona.
I'm in Minnesota and South Dakota.
I know, you get to be in 2 states.
I know. So close. Border.
I know. I love it. But anyways, we'll see you guys. Please follow us on Instagram. Feel free to DM us. We are always here for you.